The night shift at Oakland Fire Station 7 was usually quiet, broken only by the occasional car accident or kitchen fire. Jack Miller sat at his desk, reviewing incident reports from the previous week, while sipping coffee that had gone cold hours ago. 20 years of firefighting had taught him to appreciate these peaceful moments. They never lasted long. The station's old brick walls held steady against the cool October wind. Through the window, Jack could see Sam Harrison checking the equipment on Engine 43, their newest truck. The digital clock on his desk showed 11:47 p.m. when everything changed. It started with a strange humming sound that made the coffee cups vibrate. Jack looked up from his paperwork, frowning. The humming grew louder, and a bright blue light flooded through the windows. Sam dropped his checklist and stepped back from the truck, mouth open in surprise. "Chief, you might want to see this," Sam called out, his voice steady despite the unusual situation. Jack walked out to the apparatus bay, squinting against the light. Above the station, a sleek silver vessel about the size of a small bus hovered silently. The blue light came from what appeared to be its underside. Before either firefighter could speak, the light intensified and a beam shot down to the ground. Within the beam, a tall, slender figure materialized. It had silvery blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light, and 4 arms that moved with fluid grace. Its large, almond-shaped eyes reflected the station's lights like mirrors. "I seek the emergency response specialists of Earth." The being spoke in perfect English, though its mouth didn't move. Instead, a small device on its chest pulsed with each word. "I am Ambassador Dex of the Zenturi Collective. We face a crisis that only humans may be able to resolve." Jack had seen many strange things in his career, but this was a first. Still, training kicked in. When someone asks for help, you listen first and ask questions later. "I'm Chief Jack Miller," he said, stepping forward. "This is my station. What kind of crisis are we talking about?" The ambassador's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by Jack's calm response. "Our orbital station, Havens Point, houses 3,000 beings from 17 different species. 2 hours ago, we suffered a catastrophic reactor breach. The containment systems are failing and fires have broken out across multiple decks." Sam moved to stand beside Jack. "Don't you have emergency response teams up there?" Dex's shoulders dropped in what looked like shame. "Our species, we are not built for such conditions. High temperatures cause our neural networks to shut down. Most species in the Galactic Council share similar limitations. We have technology, yes, but our automated systems are overwhelmed. We need beings who can physically enter the affected areas." Jack nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. Despite all their advanced technology, these aliens lacked the basic biological resilience that humans had developed over millennia of living with fire. "How bad is it?" Jack asked, already mentally running through procedures for industrial fire scenarios. "The reactor core temperature exceeds 1,500 degrees Celsius. 3 decks are compromised. We have multiple groups trapped, and our evacuation efforts are hampered by spreading fires." The ambassador's chest device translated a sound that might have been a desperate sigh. "We observe your species' emergency responders. You routinely enter burning structures, face extreme conditions, and emerge successful. We need that capability now." Jack exchanged looks with Sam. They'd handled chemical fires, refinery blazes, and warehouse infernos, but a space station, that was new. Still, fire was fire, no matter where it burned. The station's radio crackled to life. Reports of the unusual aircraft had reached dispatch, and soon they'd have company. Jack knew he had to make a decision quickly. "Ambassador," Jack said, "we'll need more details about your station's layout, materials, and life support systems. But if you're asking if we can help," he glanced at Sam, who gave a firm nod. "That's what we do. It doesn't matter if you're from down the street or across the galaxy." Relief washed over the ambassador's alien features. The Galactic Council said involving primitive species was too risky, but I believed. I hoped. With all due respect, Ambassador, Jack said, allowing himself a small smile. Fighting fires isn't about being primitive or advanced. It's about having the will to walk into hell to save others. And humans, we've been doing that since we first tamed fire. Within 30 minutes of Ambassador Dex's arrival, Oakland Fire Station 7 became the center of an unprecedented gathering. Police cars formed a perimeter around the building, their lights painting the scene in rotating red and blue. Men in dark suits from various government agencies hurried about, speaking urgently into their phones. Above, news helicopters circled like hungry birds. Jack Miller stood in the station's briefing room, now crowded with officials from 3 different agencies. The ambassador's holographic display showed the burning space station, a massive structure that looked like a silver snowflake against the darkness of space. "The situation is getting worse," Dex said, 4 arms moving in agitation as the display zoomed in on red-hot sections of the station. "We have less than 6 hours before the reactor containment fails completely." A stern-looking government official named Alan Porter shook his head. "This is beyond our jurisdiction. We need presidential approval, environmental impact assessments, training protocols. We don't have time for paperwork." Sam Harrison cut in, standing beside Jack. "People are dying up there while we talk." Jack studied the hologram, his experienced eyes noting the fire patterns. The alien station's layout was different from anything he'd seen, but fire behavior followed universal laws. Physics didn't care if it was burning on Earth or in space. "What's our biggest obstacle?" Jack asked, turning to Dex. "Besides the obvious challenges of getting there." The ambassador's silver-blue skin rippled. "Your protective equipment. It may not be compatible with our life support systems, and the artificial gravity could fail in damaged sections." Sam stepped forward, pointing at the hologram. "Our new SCBAs have a 4-hour air supply. If we bring spare tanks and modify the connections to work with your systems." "I'm going," Jack announced, his quiet words cutting through the chaotic discussion. The room fell silent. This isn't about politics or protocols. It's about saving lives. Porter's face reddened. "Chief Miller, you can't make this decision alone. The diplomatic implications." "I'm not going as a representative of any government," Jack interrupted. "I'm going as a firefighter. That's what we do. We go in when everyone else is running out." Sam placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You're not going alone. I'm with you." The government officials erupted in protests, but Dex moved forward, hope evident in those mirror-like eyes. "You understand the risks. The temperature in affected areas exceeds your equipment's normal operating range. If your protective gear fails." "We understand," Jack said firmly. "Now show us exactly what we're dealing with. Every vent, every corridor, every safety system. We need to know it all." For the next hour, they studied the station's layout. The alien technology was advanced, but the principles remained familiar: contain the fire, protect life, prevent spread. Jack and Sam asked detailed questions about materials, air circulation, and emergency protocols. Kira Bennett, a space station liaison officer who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "I can help modify your equipment to work with their systems. I've worked on similar compatibility issues before." As they prepared, more officials arrived, bringing papers to sign and warnings to consider. Jack barely heard them. His mind was already running through scenarios, planning approaches, considering backup plans. "The Galactic Council will not be pleased," Dex said quietly to Jack as they finished their preparations. "They consider humans too unpredictable, too emotional for such delicate situations." Jack checked the seals on his modified firefighting gear one last time. Sometimes you need emotion. Sometimes you need that human instinct that says someone needs help and doesn't stop to consider the political implications. Sam returned from loading their equipment onto the Zentari shuttle. "Ready when you are, Chief." Jack looked around the station that had been his second home for 15 years. The familiar smell of diesel and leather gear, the worn floors that had supported countless emergency responses. Now they were about to attempt the most ambitious rescue in human history. "Ambassador," Jack said, securing his helmet, "let's go prove that being unpredictable isn't always a bad thing." The journey to Havens Point took exactly 17 minutes in the Centauri shuttle. Jack Miller spent every second studying the emergency blueprints on his tablet, while Sam Harrison double-checked their modified equipment. The vessel's smooth acceleration felt nothing like the bumpy ride of their usual fire engine. Through the shuttle's wide viewport, the space station grew larger. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. A massive structure of gleaming metal and glass, with visible sections glowing angry red from the internal fires. Emergency lights flashed across its surface like distant lightning. "Approaching Emergency Dock 7, the Centauri pilot announced, their translated voice calm but strained. "Be warned. Conditions in the receiving area are unstable." As the shuttle lined up with the docking port, Jack saw what the pilot meant. Even in this supposedly safe zone, the station's inhabitants were panicking. Creatures of all shapes and sizes rushed back and forth, some floating, others running on multiple legs. The scene reminded him of evacuating a crowded stadium. Except here, the crowd wasn't even remotely human. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk. Jack stood, the weight of his modified gear familiar despite the alien surroundings. "Remember the plan, Sam. We stick together, follow the primary route we mapped out, and trust our training," Sam finished, securing his helmet. Just like any other fire. The airlock cycled, and they stepped into chaos. The receiving area was filled with smoke, not the thick black smoke they were used to, but a strange, shimming purple haze. Their modified sensors immediately began analyzing the air composition. A tall, insectoid being that Jack recognized as a Proximan engineer hurried toward them. "I am Zix, chief engineer," it clicked, a translator device similar to Dex's converting its speech. "The situation has deteriorated. We've lost contact with Deck 7, and the reactor's containment field is down to 23% efficiency." Jack nodded, already moving. Other aliens pressed back against the walls as the two humans passed, their expressions showing a mix of fear and fascination. The sight of beings willingly walking toward the danger seemed to shock them. "Our equipment's reading the atmosphere fine," Sam reported as they reached the first emergency airlock. "Modifications are holding steady." The airlock door opened to reveal a corridor that could have been from any burning building on Earth, except for its curved walls and the strange, flowing script on the emergency signs. The heat hit them immediately. Their suits' external sensors registered 300 degrees Celsius and climbing. "This is nothing compared to the Anderson chemical fire last year," Sam said, his voice steady through the radio. They moved forward with practiced efficiency, checking doors and marking their route as they went. The first group of trapped station crew members they found were huddled in a maintenance bay. The aliens, something like humanoid octopi, had sealed themselves inside when their natural heat resistance failed. They stared in wonder as Jack and Sam quickly rigged a heat shield and guided them to safety. "How can you function in such conditions?" one of them asked through a translator as they reached the safe zone. "Our neural pathways begin to fail at half these temperatures. Humans evolved on a world of extremes," Jack explained, already turning back toward the danger zone. "We learned to adapt, to push our limits. More importantly, we learned to protect others who needed help." As they pressed deeper into the station, the true scale of the crisis became clear. The reactor breach had triggered a cascade of systems failures. Standard fire suppression methods had failed because they were designed for much lower temperatures. "Chief," Sam called out, checking a readout on his wrist display. "These readings, the metal in the hull is starting to deform. If we don't contain this soon." A massive boom shook the station, cutting him off. Emergency lights flashed from white to red. Zix's voice crackled over their comms, panic clear even through the translator. "Reactor containment just dropped below 20%. The whole core section is going critical." Jack steadied himself against a wall, feeling the heat even through his insulated gloves. This was the moment. The point in every major fire when decisions had to be made, when the difference between experience and technology became clear. "Sam, we're going to need every trick we learned in industrial firefighting," he said, checking his air supply. "Think you remember how we handled that refinery explosion last spring?" Sam's grin was audible in his voice. "Time to show these aliens how Earth's firefighters get things done." "Exactly," Jack replied, moving forward. "Let's give them a lesson they'll never forget." The deeper Jack and Sam moved into Haven's Point, the worse things became. The once pristine corridors now looked like the inside of a blast furnace. The strange alien metal of the walls glowed with heat, and the air shimmered even through their thermal imaging. "Air check," Jack called out as they reached another junction. The station's layout was like a giant snowflake, with 6 main corridors spreading out from the central reactor core. 3 hours of air left," Sam reported, checking his gauges. "Temperature outside the suits is hitting 600 degrees Celsius. Our cooling systems are working overtime." A violent tremor shook the station. Pieces of sealing material crashed down around them, bouncing off their protective gear. Through their comms, they could hear the panic in Zix's voice. "The reactor's magnetic containment is failing. We have multiple hull breaches on Deck 5, and the fire is spreading faster than our models predicted." Jack pressed forward, remembering similar situations in oil refineries back on Earth. "Sam, remember the pattern we used at the port fire? We need to think 3-dimensionally here." They reached a massive circular chamber that served as a junction between different sections of the station. The scene inside stopped them both. Flames danced across the walls in impossible patterns, affected by the station's artificial gravity and air circulation systems. The fire moved like a living thing, reaching out with tendrils of blue and purple flame. "I've never seen fire behave like this," Sam said, his voice filled with both awe and professional interest. "The alien atmosphere must be affecting the combustion patterns." Jack checked his tablet's modified display. "The reactor core is 2 levels down from here. We need tow." A new alarm cut through their conversation. Red emergency lights began flashing in a pattern they hadn't seen before. "Critical alert." Zix's voice was nearly hysterical now. "We have crew members trapped in the auxiliary control room. The fire has cut off both escape routes, and their environmental systems are failing." Jack looked at the station schematic, quickly plotting routes in his head. The auxiliary control room was off to their right, while the reactor core lay in the opposite direction. Time was running out for both. "Sam, take the right corridor. Get those crew members out. I'll push on to the reactor." "Chief, the protocols." "Don't work here," Jack finished. "We need to split up. Those people need help now, and someone has to reach that reactor before it's too late." Sam nodded, understanding the logic even if he didn't like it. They had trained together long enough to trust each other's judgment. "Be careful, Jack. That core is putting out enough heat to melt our gear if you get too close." "I got a plan," Jack said, already moving toward the left corridor. "Just focus on getting those crew members to safety." They split up, each taking a different path into the inferno. Jack could hear Sam on the comms, coordinating with Zix about the trapped crew members. He forced himself to focus on his own task. The corridor leading to the reactor core was like nothing he had ever experienced. The heat was beyond anything their suits were designed to handle. Warning indicators flashed on his heads-up display, showing that the outer layer of his protective gear was beginning to degrade. Through gaps in the flooring, Jack could see the reactor below. It pulsed with an angry red light, looking less like a piece of technology and more like an awakening volcano. The whole chamber vibrated with its unstable energy. "Zix," he called over the comms, "I need to know exactly what systems are still functioning in the core. Give me everything you've got." As the alien engineer began rattling off technical details, Jack studied the scene before him. 20 years of fighting fires had taught him to read situations quickly, to spot patterns, to find solutions where others saw only disaster. The alien technology might be advanced, but fire was fire and heat was heat. Sometimes, he muttered to himself, remembering what he always told new firefighters. The old ways work best. Sam Harrison moved through the burning corridor with practiced speed, each step calculated despite the urgent situation. The auxiliary control room was just ahead, and his helmet sensors showed multiple life signs inside. The heat had risen to dangerous levels, making the metal deck plates creak under his boots. "Chief, I'm approaching the control room now," he reported over the radio. Static answered him. The interference from the reactor was getting worse. He was on his own. Through the smoke, he could see the control room's reinforced door. A group of alien crew members pressed against its observation window. 3 Centauri, and what looked like 2 crystalline beings he didn't recognize. Their faces showed pure terror as flames licked at the walls around them. Sam checked his tablet. The room's emergency force field was failing, and toxic gases from the fire were starting to seep in. He had minutes, maybe less, to get them out. "Stand back from the door," he shouted, knowing their translators would convey his warning. The aliens scrambled away from the entrance. The door's electronic lock was fried, but Sam had dealt with stuck doors before. He pulled out the modified hydraulic spreader from his kit. Human technology adapted to work with alien materials. The tool whined as he forced it into the door's seam. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the corridor. Sam looked up to see a support beam, glowing red-hot, starting to bend. The station's artificial gravity was fluctuating, making the beam's enormous weight shift unpredictably. "Come on," he muttered, putting more pressure on the spreader. The door began to move, metal screaming against metal. The beam above gave another warning creak. Sam could feel the heat intensifying. His suit's external temperature readings were in the critical zone. But he kept working. Those creatures behind the door needed him. With a final groan, the door slid open enough for escape. "Move. Now," Sam ordered, holding the gap open with his body. The aliens didn't hesitate, squeezing through the opening one by one. The last crystalline being was halfway through when the beam finally gave way. Sam looked up to see the massive piece of metal falling directly toward them. In that split second, training and instinct took over. He shoved the alien clear and tried to dodge, but he wasn't quite fast enough. The beam caught his left leg, pinning him to the deck. Pain shot through his body despite the suit's protection. "Keep moving," he shouted to the rescued crew, who had stopped to stare at him. "Get to the evacuation point. Go." The aliens hesitated, their translators conveying his words, but perhaps not the urgency behind them. The crystalline being he had saved stepped forward, its faceted surface reflecting the flames around them. "We cannot leave you," it said through its translator. "You risked yourself for us." Sam tried to push himself up, but the beam had him firmly trapped. His suit's integrity warnings were flashing red. The heat was becoming unbearable. "You have to go. The whole section could collapse any minute." More creaking sounds above emphasized his point. The aliens looked at each other, clearly torn between their safety and helping their rescuer. "Go," Sam commanded again, using his best firefighter voice. "That's an order. Get to safety. I'll find another way out." The aliens finally moved, hurrying down the corridor toward the safe zones. Sam watched them go, then clicked his radio, hoping it would work through the interference. "Chief," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I got them out, but I'm in a bit of trouble here. Don't worry about me, though. You focus on that reactor. I'll figure something out." He looked at his suit's readings. The external temperature was still climbing, and his trapped leg was sending waves of pain through his body. But Sam Harrison hadn't survived 15 years as a firefighter by giving up when things got tough. "All right," he said to himself, reaching for his tools. "Time to show these aliens that humans don't just save others. We save ourselves, too." Jack Miller stood at the entrance to the reactor core, facing heat that could melt steel. His suit's warning systems screamed at him to retreat, but he pushed forward. Through the waves of distorted air, he could see 3 Centauri engineers trapped on a maintenance platform. They huddled behind a failing shield, their silver-blue skin dulled by fear and heat exposure. The reactor below them pulsed like an angry heart. Each blast of energy made the entire chamber shake. Sparks flew from damaged control panels, and streams of plasma leaked from ruptured cooling lines. Zix, Jack called into his radio. I need to know exactly what powers those cooling systems. The alien engineer's voice crackled through static. Liquid nitrogen mixed with elements your language has no words for. But the main pumps are offline. We can't. I don't need the pumps, Jack interrupted, his mind racing. I need to know if the coolant is still in those tanks. A pause. Yes, but without power to the pumps. Sometimes the old ways work best, Jack said, pulling equipment from his gear bag. And sometimes you have to fight fire with an explosion. He had seen something similar once, during a factory fire back home. Sometimes, a controlled blast could starve a fire of oxygen or disrupt its fuel source. The principle should work here, if he got it right. Listen carefully, he told the trapped engineers. When I give the signal, you need to drop your shield and run for the exit. Don't stop, don't look back. Understand? The aliens nodded, their movements jerky with fear. Jack could see their protective gear starting to fail. He had minutes, maybe less. Working quickly, he attached shake charges to the coolant tanks. It was a technique they'd developed for fighting chemical fires on Earth, using small explosions to spread fire-suppressing materials. But never at this scale, never with alien technology. Static burst through his radio. Chief, it was Sam's voice, weak but determined. I got the crew out, but I'm trapped. Don't worry about me. Just stop that reactor. Jack's hands froze for a moment. His oldest friend was in trouble, but he couldn't help him now. Sometimes being a leader meant making impossible choices. Hang in there, Sam, he replied. This will be over soon. The reactor gave another violent pulse. Warning lights flashed across every surface. Containment was about to fail completely. Jack finished setting the charges and moved to a protected position. Zix, cut power to all safety systems in this section on my mark, he ordered. Engineers, get ready to run. Jack took a deep breath. If his calculations were wrong, if the alien materials didn't react the way he expected, he'd make everything worse. But there was no time for doubt. 3, 2, 1. Now. Several things happened at once. The safety systems died. The engineers dropped their shield, and Jack triggered the charges. The explosion was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The coolant tanks burst in a carefully controlled pattern, releasing their contents in a spreading wave. The supercooled liquid met the overheated reactor core in a blast of steam and freezing gas. For a terrible moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the reactor's angry red glow began to fade. Temperature readings dropped rapidly. The violent shaking slowed, then stopped. Jack watched his sensors, barely daring to breathe. The engineers had made it to safety, but the reactor was the real threat. If he'd failed, containment stabilizing. Zix's voice was filled with disbelief. Core temperature dropping. How? How did you know this would work? I didn't, Jack admitted, finally letting himself relax slightly. But sometimes you have to trust your instincts. Now, where's Sam? I need tow. Another explosion rocked the station, this one from far away. But Jack knew, somehow, that it wasn't a new threat. He smiled behind his mask. Never mind. That would be Sam, getting himself out of trouble. Let's go help him clean up. 3 days after the Havens Point crisis, Jack Miller and Sam Harrison stood before the Galactic Council. The Grand Chamber stretched high above them, filled with representatives from 17 different species. Sam leaned slightly on his crutches, his injured leg still healing, but he stood tall beside his chief. The council chamber looked nothing like the Oakland fire station. Floating platforms held alien diplomats of all shapes and sizes. Light filtered through crystal walls, creating patterns that would have seemed impossible on Earth. But to Jack, the politics felt familiar. He'd dealt with plenty of officials after difficult fires back home. The head counselor, a tall being made of shifting colors, spoke first. "We have reviewed the events at Haven's Point. Your actions were unprecedented, unauthorized, dangerous." The translator paused before adding, "and absolutely remarkable." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Ambassador Dex stood from their seat, 4 arms moving in an elegant gesture. These humans saved not only the station but also proved something vital. While we advanced technologically, we forgot the importance of direct action, of physical courage. The station's damage report shows creative use of our technology, another counselor noted, particularly the method used to cool the reactor core. No species has attempted such a direct approach before. Sam shifted on his crutches. Sometimes the simple solutions work best. We've been fighting fires on Earth for thousands of years. You learn a few tricks. And your injury. The head counselor turned to Sam. Our reports say you deliberately remained behind to save the control room crew, then escaped by using your cutting tools to drop through 3 deck levels. Had to get out somehow, Sam said with a slight smile. The beam was too heavy to lift, so I made my own exit. Basic firefighting rule. Always know where your secondary escape route is, even if you have to make one. Jack stepped forward. Council members, we're not here for recognition. We're firefighters. This is what we do. But we would like to suggest something. The chamber grew quiet. Jack continued. Earth has thousands of firefighters with experience in extreme conditions. We've learned to handle everything from forest fires to chemical blazes. Maybe it's time to share that knowledge. The counselors exchanged looks. The head counselor's colors shifted thoughtfully. You propose some kind of exchange program. A training academy, Jack clarified. Taught by human firefighters, adapted for different species. We can't all handle the same conditions, but we can learn from each other. Combine our experience with your technology. Excited discussion broke out across the chamber. Ambassador Dex moved to join Jack and Sam. The concept has merit. Many worlds lack emergency response capabilities for extreme situations. Haven's Point proved this gap in our preparedness. The head counselor raised a hand for silence. Chief Miller, this crisis has shown us that perhaps we were hasty in our judgment of humans as a primitive species. Your kind possesses qualities we have forgotten the value of. Sam grinned. We're not primitive. We're just practical. The council will need time to consider the full implications of a joint training program. The head counselor continued. But for now, we have a more immediate matter to address. They gestured, and a smaller alien floated forward carrying 2 objects. They looked like medals, made of a metal that seemed to capture and reflect light in impossible ways. These are the Stars of Valor, our highest honor for courage. Never before awarded to non-council species. The counselor's colors brightened. Until today. As the medals were presented, Jack thought about his station back in Oakland. About all the firefighters across Earth who would soon have the chance to share their skills with the galaxy. Some would say humans were joining the galactic community. But to Jack, it felt more like the galaxy was finally ready to learn what humanity had known all along. That true courage meant walking into danger when others ran away, and that helping others was the highest calling any species could answer. Thank you, he said simply, accepting the medal. But if you really want to thank us, help us build something that will save more lives in the future. The head counselor's colors shifted to what Jack had learned was amusement. Chief Miller, I believe this is the beginning of a most interesting partnership. Sam leaned closer to Jack and whispered, think they're ready to learn about smoke jumpers. Jack smiled, already imagining the future possibilities. One step at a time, Sam. One step at a time.